LSU with a massive 38-0 shutout win at home against New Mexico. What was good about that game, but also what can we watch from that game that we can build upon? The three things that I liked and the three things that I didn't from LSU's win over New Mexico, plus so much more on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, we're on YouTube as well. So if you'd like to listen to the podcast, you can find us on your preferred podcast platform, but you can also watch the podcast on YouTube as well. So just search Locked on LSU in the search bar, hit that subscribe button, and you won't miss a single second of your Locked on LSU content because you'll get a notification as soon as the podcasts drop. I also want to let y'all know that today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Thank you to LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every day. I graduated from LSU. I've been covering the team since 2016, and I now host a sports talk radio show in Nashville, Tennessee. So, like I mentioned, massive 38-0 shutout win to New Mexico. I don't remember the exact year off the top of my head when LSU had their last shutout, but it's been a minute. So, we'll take that. It's been quite some time. And there were a whole lot of things to take away from this game. And I know that going into a lesser opponent like New Mexico, you may not look at it as something where you can take a lot away from. I don't think that this is something that the national media or college football fans across the nation are looking at this game to take things away from LSU. But I think we as LSU fans, we can, because the season gets started this upcoming Saturday against Auburn. October is a freaking grind for LSU. And I want to get into that on tomorrow's podcast. Make sure to check out tomorrow's edition of Locked on LSU for a full breakdown on what this next month means for Brian Kelly and this LSU football program. But I think that these past 4 weeks have given this young and inexperienced LSU team, an LSU team that needs to build chemistry, it's given them the opportunity to do that. Now, you had two difficult opponents in Florida State and Mississippi State, an SEC in-division rival. But overall, this 4-game sample size has been like a little bit of a warm-up for LSU. But it's been great to see improvement and consistency over these last 4 weeks, no matter who the opponent is. Because I've been saying ever since that first loss to Florida State, I want to see improvement. I want to see the areas where LSU struggled, whether that be special teams or whether that be pass blocking, whether that be Jayden Daniels building some comfort throwing the ball. I just want to see a little bit of improvement week over week. And once we saw some improvement, I wanted to see that consistency. I wanted to see consistency on the offensive line. I wanted to see consistency from Jayden Daniels and feeling that comfort that he can sit back in the pocket. I wanted to see those things. And I feel like after these 4 weeks, and I wanted to see those things before got into the meat and potatoes of SEC play, because I understand LSU already had an SEC opponent, but things get real. Things get real quick in the month of October. So I wanted to see those things kind of iron themselves out before October. And I feel like although LSU still has some flaws, LSU is not a national championship caliber team at the moment. I'm seeing improvements, and that's what I wanted to see. So overall, I think, I look at Jayden Daniels and I see how he's gotten so much more comfortable. And also, I understand that New Mexico, you're going to see much more difficult teams. But I like to see Jayden Daniels take the opportunity against Southern and against New Mexico to get more comfortable and confident. I think one of my biggest takeaways from that Florida State game was just how rattled Jayden Daniels looked. I think that's partly on the coaching staff for him not being completely prepared. I think that's partly on himself for maybe getting in his head or maybe not taking the opportunities when they were given to him. And of course, that's on the offensive line as well. It's tough to feel comfortable and confident sitting back in the pocket whenever you're constantly getting pressured by that Florida State front seven. So I think there's a few people who are culpable in that. But I also, giving that culpability, if that's a word, I don't know if it is, doesn't matter, to the coaching staff and to Jayden Daniels himself and to the offensive line, I also have to give credit to those three groups as well. Because I think all three groups, the coaching staff, Jayden Daniels on the offensive line, and really, the offense as a whole, they all play a part in Jayden Daniels' growth and Jayden Daniels' ability to kind of continue to get over those hurdles. And you could tell against Mississippi State that he had a little bit of anxiety. You could tell that he wasn't completely in command. And I think that showed, in the first half at least, that showed on the box score and that showed on the score sheet. But you saw him settle in the second half. And that's how LSU eventually kind of scratched and clawed their way back into that game. And I think you saw that comfort continue to grow against New Mexico as well. Against New Mexico, he was 24 of 29 for 278 yards. A solid day. It's not a massive, Heisman day. It's a solid day. And I think that's what LSU needs from Jayden Daniels. I don't think LSU needs Jayden Daniels to be this 450-yard, massive passing quarterback. Just do whatever you need to do to set up the offense for success and take care of the football. And that's exactly what he's been doing. He has yet to throw an interception on the season. So Jayden Daniels has been looking more confident, more comfortable in the pocket, and it's been showing. So that's a good thing. And I think overall, the offense as a whole against New Mexico showed so much improvement and so much promise for what's to come. Put up 633 yards of total offense. I mean, that's just an astronomical number. And I think that in addition to just the numbers that they put up, because you could look at that alone and say, oh, this LSU offense is great. This LSU offense is wonderful. But you also have to couch it with one, it's against New Mexico, but also a New Mexico team with a really solid defense. That's something that I talked a lot about last week. We had Steve Virgin on the show last week, who covers New Mexico for the Albuquerque Journal. He harped on the New Mexico defense. Brian Kelly talked about the New Mexico defense. The New Mexico defense is no joke. But I also think another thing that to kind of add to the credit of this LSU offense, was the fact that I don't think that Brian Kelly and company went into this game with the intention of it being just pure and utter domination and nothing else. Because I feel like if LSU really wanted to put 85 points against New Mexico, they probably could have gotten pretty damn near close to it. I feel like this LSU coaching staff took this opportunity to say, hey, we're going to win this game, but let's try and use this game to work out some of our kinks, to give some guys time that maybe haven't had a ton of time. Like Brian Kelly mentioned, it was one of his biggest priorities to get Jack Bech involved in this game, and that's exactly what they did. Even when he was dealing with shin splints, when he was dealing with some nagging injuries earlier on in the season and in camp, Brian Kelly and this coaching staff wanted to take the opportunity to give guys reps and to work out some of the problems that were there, not just completely dominate. And they still put up 633 yards of offense. So that, I think, is a kind of a feather in the cap of this offense. But I think overall, it's becoming more balanced. It's a way more balanced offense. Against Florida State, you didn't see a lot in the passing game at all, but you did see a whole lot of running around and a whole lot of avoiding sacks. But I think that with the combination of the comfort and the growing confidence for Jayden Daniels, the fact that his offensive line is starting to gel, we're seeing some more consistency on the offensive line. And I want to get into that a little bit more coming up next. We've got John Emery Jr. back in the fold, who was out for the first two games with academic ineligibility. He had 45 yards on 9 carries on Saturday. And I think that just overall, this offense is starting to click and this offense is starting to find its identity. And that's what I needed to see LSU do before they get into really the bulk of SEC play. And I think where it's at right now, I'm pleased. Now, coming up next, I want to get into the 3 things that I didn't like, because this LSU offense isn't perfect, albeit I've seen improvement, much needed improvement. There are still some things that make me a little bit nervous. There are still some things that maybe were erased a little bit by this being a game against New Mexico, but that won't be the case against Auburn and Tennessee and Florida, Arkansas, Alabama, so on and so forth. So coming up next, after all the praise that I gave LSU's offense, I want to talk about some of the 3 things that I didn't like from this game, some of the things that I think we can move forward and build upon. So we'll get into that coming up next. So I love to bet on games. I think that sports betting is such a fun way to get involved in the game. But if you're like me, you don't like the super high stakes, super risky bets. I prefer to play it safe. And if you're a small business owner, you probably prefer to play it safe as well. I mean, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. I know I wouldn't want to do that, and you don't either. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. I work for a radio station. A couple months ago, one of our producers left kind of on short notice, and we needed to find someone to fill in that role, and we needed to find someone soon. And it was that easy to find someone to fill that role with LinkedIn Jobs because it was free and it was super quick. It's a free job posting that takes only a few minutes to set up. You just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. LinkedIn has simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. They'll filter out all of the people who aren't qualified so you don't have to do it yourself. We're almost into quarter four, and it's so important to finish the year strong. And I know that's important to you and your small business as well. And you might just be able to find the right team member to do it, to help you do that, to help finish the year strong. And LinkedIn Jobs will help you do that. That's why small businesses ranked LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, we're on YouTube as well. And of course, we are part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Now, LSU had a commanding 38-0 victory over New Mexico. A whole lot of good things to take away from that game, but there were also some bad things as well. So I want to focus on the 3 things that I didn't like. First and foremost, this one's kind of a two-parter, but the first thing I didn't like was the blindside block call on Colby Fields on that second punt return, on Jack Bech's second punt return. So he's returning the punt, brings it to the house, scores a touchdown on a punt return, and that was called back because of a blindside block from Colby Fields. And look, I understand that was probably technically from the textbook, probably considered a blindside block. I thought it was a little bit of a weak play because if you go back and watch it, Colby Fields isn't coming at him from the back. It's not a completely blindside block. It wasn't a complete blindside hit. He just came at him from the side. So it wasn't as egregious of a call as they could have made. I really do think that call could have stood. That the touchdown could have stood. I personally thought it was a little bit of a weak call. I see what the refs see. Overall, I thought it was a little bit of a stretch. So, I mean, I'm not going to sit up here and complain about the refs and say the refs hate LSU. So, no, I'm not going to do that. I thought it was a little bit weak, but okay. I think the biggest issue that I have, though, is after that Jack Bech punt return, LSU gets fine field position at their own 20-yard line. You'd prefer it to be better, but they get fine field position. I think my issue with it is the ensuing drive after that call, after the punt return was called back. So, of course, you're 1st and 10 at the 20. John Emery gets a short gain of 4 yards. You're at the LSU 24. Armani Goodwin gets another short run for 3 yards. So now you're at 3rd and 3. Jayden Daniels has that pass to Josh Williams, 21-yard pass. So now you are almost in New Mexico territory and you've got a first down. Okay, they're moving the ball downfield. This isn't what I have a problem with. Now, Jayden Daniels completes a short pass to Jack Bech for 6 yards. Now you're in New Mexico territory. 2nd and 4. Jayden Daniels has a pretty solid run for 23 yards. You're even deeper in New Mexico territory. You pick up a first down. Great. And this is kind of where things started to unravel a little bit. That next play at 1st and 10, Jayden Daniels passing complete. And then that next play, 2nd and 10, Malik Nabers for a short pass for 6 yards. Now you're at the New Mexico 17. Now you're moving into the end zone. Then New Mexico gets a personal foul penalty, puts LSU in even better position because now you're at the New Mexico 9. So Josh Williams gets a gain of 8 yards, and then that's called back because of a holding call on Cole Taylor, 10 yards. So now you're at the New Mexico 19, first and goal. Then Jayden Daniels completes that pass to Jack Bech for 10 yards. So now you're at 2nd and 9 because of the. So now you're at 2nd and 9. Okay, yeah. And then Jayden Daniels has that pass complete for 9 yards to Cole Taylor. And that's called back. It's a touchdown. That's called back because of the pass interference call. That's what it was. The pass interference call on Malik Nabers, 15-yard penalty. So what would have been or should have been a touchdown from the penalty that you just dug yourself out of to get into the end zone. Well, now you just committed another penalty. Now you're at the New Mexico 24. So you're that much deeper. It's 2nd and goal, and you have to kind of wheel your way back into it just because of a little, discipline issue. 2nd and goal, New Mexico 24, Jayden Daniels gets sacked. And then on the next play, 3rd and goal, Jayden Daniels pass complete to Cole Taylor for 11 yards. You're at the New Mexico 21. You're not getting that touchdown. You're not getting into the end zone. So ultimately, they settle for a field goal. David Ramos misses the 38-yard field goal. So just kind of a little bit of a bleep show of an offensive possession after LSU had just been moving down the field pretty well. I mean, they had a touchdown on that first drive, settled for a field goal in that second drive. That was another problem that I had, which leads me to my next point about 3 things that I didn't like, but want to address this first, was if you commit penalties like that against New Mexico, you can probably find your way back into the end zone. You can probably throw or run your way back deeper into New Mexico territory, as LSU did, of course, settled for a field goal. But penalties like that one, and only picking up, 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards, whenever you are at, 3rd and whatever, that doesn't fly against Auburn, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee. You can't be making those little mistakes and not making bigger plays like that offensively. The penalties LSU should have scored there. I mean, the score at that point, it should have been 17-0. But instead, LSU defers for a field goal and misses it. And you don't get any points off of that drive. That's what I had an issue with. It didn't cost LSU the game against New Mexico, but they would have been at so much more of a comfortable lead after they really had been dominating New Mexico, limiting them to just 1 first down at that point in the game. They would have had so much more of a comfortable lead against New Mexico, and instead they settled for no points on that drive. So that's one thing that I didn't like was, 1, the sloppy penalties, and 2, not being able to kind of to take command over the offense in the way that it felt like the Jayden Daniels incompletion, the Jayden Daniels sack, and also the Jack Bech punt return for a touchdown that was then called back. It almost rattled LSU a little bit. So I think that's one thing, is they need a little bit more of shorter term memory. But that I mentioned that also brought me to something else that I didn't like. My second point that I didn't like was in the red zone. So that was one instance where they were continuing to commit penalties near the end zone, and they just made it so much more difficult for themselves to score. The second instance, it was on the second drive. So this was actually the second drive, first instance of the game of kind of red zone ineptitude, was LSU's at 3rd and 6 at the 14. They're driving. The offense is moving. Now, Malik Nabers is in the end zone, and Jayden Daniels drops back, targets Malik Nabers, but on a route where I assume he was supposed to just, plant his feet and wait for Jayden Daniels to hand him the ball. He kept going. So Jayden Daniels hit Malik Nabers where I assume he was supposed to be, and Malik Nabers kept going. So, of course, that was at 3rd and 6, so they had to settle for a field goal there. I think the red zone, albeit LSU put up a ton of points and a ton of yards, they need to fine-tune some of the red zone discipline and almost like the red zone IQ of being aware of your surroundings. Malik Nabers needed to understand where that defender was and what the communication was between he and Jayden Daniels. Because if you continually get yourself into your opponent's territory and you're not being able to score, well, that just makes it so much more difficult to win a game. And you're not going to win very many games that way if you're not able to take the points and to capitalize off of the field position that you put yourself in. So that whole drive, that whole third drive, after that second Jack Bech punt return, and then also in that second drive where LSU had to settle for a field goal, went at 10-0, where it really should have been 14-0. Those were two things that I think the offense really needs to tweak. But the third thing, and this is nobody's fault, it's just one thing that I hate. It was all the injuries that we saw on Saturday night. Of course, we saw Jayden Daniels leave the game, and Brian Kelly addressed the media on Monday and said, hey, it's not going to be a lingering injury. So that's good. But Jayden Daniels went out. We saw Garrett Nussmeier go in, which I want to get into that coming up next. We saw Major Burns also out for 3 to 6 weeks with a neck injury. And Brian Kelly said he could probably return sooner. Just didn't want to rush it. He said, I don't want to get into specifics when you're talking about a neck injury. He's been cleared by the doctors, but he's going to need some rest. I mean, that's a scary thing that you're dealing with. Your neck and your spine, those are pretty important. So it's, a tough loss to be losing Major Burns. Also, Brian Thomas, Malik Nabers, and Armani Goodman were all out with an injury at some point in the game. We'll have an injury update coming up on tomorrow's podcast from Brian Kelly. But that was what I didn't like to see, was kind of their big time playmakers get a little bit banged up. So the three things that I didn't like: all the injuries, Jayden Daniels leaving the game, Brian Thomas, Malik Nabers, Armani Goodwin, all got a little bit banged up at some point in the game as well. Didn't love the red zone. It's a lot of the red zone offense. I felt like LSU set themselves up in great field position, both on that second drive where they settled for a field goal, on that third drive as well, when they committed back-to-back penalties. And they had to settle for a field goal. And of course, Damon Ramos missed it. You got to make those kicks. Those are the three things that I did not like against New Mexico. But coming up next, the three things that I did like, and it was tough for me to narrow it down to three because there were a whole lot of good things, but we'll get into that coming up next. The three things that I did like, the three things that I loved from LSU in this 38-0 win over New Mexico. There were a whole lot of things that I did like about the offense. One thing, first and foremost, was the fact that Jayden Daniels was not the leading rusher on Saturday night. Now, I'm going to couch that by saying there's nothing wrong about having a mobile quarterback. It's actually been really, really wonderful for LSU to have a mobile quarterback who's able to protect himself when this offensive line is still learning to gel, still kind of gaining some chemistry, and they aren't able to protect him. It's never a bad thing to have a mobile quarterback. But I always just wanted to focus in on the fact that this LSU team, this LSU offense should be much more balanced than just Jayden Daniels running the football. And that's what we saw on Saturday. I loved the run game, and I loved the way that LSU was able to spread the ball out both on the ground and in the air. But on the ground, Noah Cain, he had his season high 94 yards, 11 carries, 2 touchdowns. He had that big 49-yarder run. Armani Goodman and Noah Cain, they totaled for 4 touchdowns. Armani Goodwin had 2, and they both totaled for 188 yards. So really big day from both of those two backs, and also getting John Emery Jr. back into the fold. He had 45 yards and 9 carries against New Mexico. So big day for the running backs, and I love that Jayden Daniels is getting some help in the running game as well. Because as I just mentioned, I didn't like to see the injuries against New Mexico, and Jayden Daniels rolling out and making those big run plays, that just makes him more susceptible for injury. So seeing the running backs kind of step up and take command of the ground game, I love to see. But I also mentioned that I love to see the ball getting spread around to so many different receivers. And that's the second thing that I liked, because this LSU wide receiver room is stacked. There are so many talented players, and they really took advantage of it on Saturday night. Of course, when Kayshon Boutte was out for the birth of his baby boy. So congratulations to Kayshon Boutte and his girlfriend. He will be back in the fold against Auburn. But even in his absence, this LSU passing game was able to pop off, if you will. So Brian Kelly mentioned last week that he wanted to get Jack Bech involved in the passing game, and they really made that their priority. And I saw that from the very beginning of the game, because on Jayden Daniels' very first pass, it went right to Jack Bech. But they can spread the ball around, and they can utilize all the talent in this LSU wide receiver room. They had 10 different pass catchers on Saturday, including the tight ends and including the running backs as well, but 4 different receivers in the first drive alone. Like I mentioned, that first drive to Jack Bech, that next pass to Malik Nabers, then Josh Williams, a running back, getting involved in the passing game. I like that in those short situations, kind of a third down back situation, and then Brian Thomas as well. It was great to see Brian Thomas get involved a little bit more. So we used a lot of 4 and 5 wide receiver sets throughout the game. I loved to see LSU take advantage of those talented wide receivers, missing they're probably the most important one. But you got Jack Bech, kind of your big bodied physical wide receiver. Same with Kyron Lacey, big body, just very physical receivers that can nudge any defender that comes their way, almost like an AJ Brown type of wide receiver. Of course, Eagles wide receiver. And then you have Malik Nabers, who's super quick, super twitchy. He's a really solid slot guy. He had 6 catches for 65 yards on Saturday night. And of course, you have Chris Hilton, who is so fast and he's able to take advantage of that speed. I mean, his high school track star, and it showed on Saturday night. You get that big 51-yard bomb on first down, LSU second possession. And he's a young guy. It's good to see a young guy like Chris Hilton get involved, because this is a wide receiver room that's losing a good bit of its talent and losing a good bit of Jayden Daniels' go-to guys next year. Kayshon Boutte, of course, going to the draft. Dre Jenkins, his eligibility will be up. So it was good to see Chris Hilton get involved and be, a young guy that's able to kind of get groomed as he's in this room next year returning. And of course, Brian Thomas, who uses his height to his advantage. He is so tall and he is so long. He almost looks like a corner out there, and that he really uses that to his advantage to beat defenders. So between Jack Bech, Malik Nabers, Kyron Lacey, Chris Hilton, Brian Thomas, I mean, this wide receiver room really flexed its talent, and I loved to see that. The third thing that I loved to see was how many true freshmen were out there making plays. I mean, you've got a true freshman sandwich on this offensive line in Will Campbell and Emery Jones at left tackle and right tackle, respectively. This was the only time we've seen so far this season, for the offensive line to have a little bit of consistency. Before the New Mexico game, they changed the offensive line lineup or rotation 3 times in as many games. It was nice to see get some consistency there, and it was nice to see these 2 true freshmen out there making plays, and it looks like that's going to be your offensive line grouping moving forward. So, I mean, this offensive line, I think, will be a force in the next few years whenever you have Emery Jones and Will Campbell able to get a little bit more experience and a little bit more size under their belt. But the third true freshman that I love to see was Harold Perkins. I talk about him every single Monday. I talk about him every single game. And I show people who aren't LSU fans who I'm watching games with, I say, that's a true freshman. That guy out there who's not just out on the edge, who's not just stopping the passing game, but also is up on the inside and is stopping the run, something that might not be super comfortable for a lot of younger guys. He's able to set the edge. He's able to come up on the inside and stop the run. And he's able to be super versatile. He can play linebacker. He can play in that front 4. Harold Perkins is, I believe, has talent beyond his age and beyond his years. So it was great to see those 3 freshmen, these 3 true freshmen out there making plays, because that just shows how much depth LSU has moving forward. And I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention the defense once, because the defense, I think, has continued to show us that this might just be the anchor of this team, that the defense can take care of business while the offense might need to just, fix some tweaks here and there, while the offense still needs time to build some chemistry. The defense can be like, no, I got it. I got this. No worries. Because the defense held New Mexico to 2 first downs. Obviously, of course, a shutout. And New Mexico gained just 88 total yards. They averaged 1.6 yards per rush. This defense completely stuffed this New Mexico offense. And this is not a New Mexico offense that is very high-powered. This is not a very scary New Mexico offense. I have to admit that. But LSU's defense did what they needed to do. And Brian Kelly tasked that defense with shutting out New Mexico, and they delivered. So even amongst all of the injuries on defense, and they had to do a lot of shuffling around, Bernard Converse filled in at that safety position that he hasn't played since his sophomore year at Oklahoma State. He was able to move into that spot pretty seamlessly and had himself a pretty solid game. So I need to give the defense a little bit of love there, because the defense played out of their minds and makes me super confident about what they can do in SEC play. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up on tomorrow's show, I'll give out my game balls plus what should we be ready for as LSU fans for the month of October? I'll get into that coming up on tomorrow's podcast, but you can get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Every day, host Chris Gordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. Make Locked On SEC your second listen.